All right, so one of my students had an error with their um, program where what would happen is this all my new code? Okay, so I could replicate the glitch immediately because this is all of my new code. I just put it in one block. Um, I could even make a block. I could call it error corrector. I could just toss this in here when I need it. But I need to define it first as all that. Okay, so here's my error corrector. We're going to talk about what it does. So as of right now, my student has a glitch where he has a really well-working game engine. Sometimes his character, jumping around, he gets stuck in the floor. And we spent a long time talking about it in class. We couldn't figure out a problem. I had other students to help. But I spent a little bit of time putting some work into it, and I found a solution. There's many solutions to this. This is kind of a hacky one. This solution does is the way his code works is that there's basically a physics engine where there is two kinds of like momentum. There's your x momentum and your y momentum. Your x momentum increases as you hold an arrow key. It slows down as you're touching the ground and not holding an arrow key. So you get this slight sliding effect. Very cool. But the problem is that if you land on a platform and your collision isn't detected very well, and you'll sink into that platform a little bit, and then since since your sprite is always touching the ground, it can't gain any momentum because its friction is always decreasing because it's touching the ground. So now my sprite can't really move. It's stuck. It's literally stuck in the ground. So how did we fix that? So the code I just made to help the student correct that is this error corrector. So I will slap that onto the bottom. I think I actually had it in here, but maybe that's fine. It should have actually these sets inside the definition. These are part of my error corrector. Okay, so I have my error corrector, and now when I run my code, now it's smooth. I don't fall into the floor. But it's not that I updated the collision. It's not that I fixed the physics engine. All I did is I did a very hacky solution. So I made two variables called ground adjuster. One of them is 0.1, one of them is negative 0.1. And what the error corrector does is it just constantly repeats this. So whenever the sprite is going to change positions, whenever its location is going to get updated, what this does is it'll keep looping until the sprite's not touching the ground. And the code that it'll run until the sprite's not touching the ground to make sure it's not stuck in the ground is it will run code that increases its height by a variable called ground adjuster, which starts at 0.1. And then if it's still touching the ground, it'll decrease its height by ground adjuster, which is ground adjuster 2, which is -1. So it'll go up 1 and then down to -1, and then each loop it'll increase the number that it's moving up and down by a very small amount. So first it'll start at its normal spot. It'll say, "Am I touching the ground?" If it's not, okay, cool. All of this gets skipped. If it is still touching the ground after all of the position code ends, after all the movement code ends, then it'll say, "Okay, I'm still touching the ground. That's an error. I should move up a little bit, and let's see if I'm not touching the ground now." And then it says, "Oh, I'm still touching the ground. Maybe, maybe the nearest, maybe it's because I'm touching a roof. Maybe I need to go down. Maybe the ground I'm touching is the roof. So I'll go down a little bit and see if I'm still touching the ground. And I'll go up a little more, down a little more. And the sprite will constantly kind of check where the closest, gap is, where it can avoid touching the ground. And it'll kind of just stay in that spot. So usually it'll look pretty fluid. You'll see slight, um, breaks in momentum for one frame on some landings or some other things when it has to adjust. Overall, it's pretty fluid. This kind of hacky solution does add one error, Quentin, or whoever's watching this. But that error is that there's a new glitch where if I mash up, I think I can stick to roof sometime. There we go. So because of my error checker and the way it works, If I get enough up inputs, I can get my character stuck on roofs, which is obviously not what we want. So you might want to change this code around a little bit. You might want to add something that says, well, you know, maybe a variable that's just called, up or down, or like a boolean. And a boolean is a true or false. Like it can be a. I'm being too complicated. I'm thinking in computer science now. What you could add, Quentin, is maybe something to check whether the error checker finished by adjusting it up, which would be right here, or if it finished by adjusting it down, which would be inside of this loop over here, inside of this if statement over here. It would be right here is where it would finish. And maybe what you could say is if it finished by touching by moving it down, maybe you should set its momentum because we know that it just hit a roof. If it's finished by adjusting it down, maybe we could set its friction or momentum for its y variable, it's the amount it's moving up and down. You could set that to maybe 0 or maybe even slight negative numbers so that he immediately, when he hits a roof, just starts falling straight back down. So he bonks his head and falls back down. And that's kind of the intended behavior, but maybe you could just add something in there. But this error corrector code should work well for you, Quentin, and I actually have to get to class. So you could copy it exactly how it is. If you have any questions about how I made it, you can ask. And it just goes right at the bottom. And yep. All right. See you later, Quentin. And this game engine, by the way, is very amazing. It's very cool to see. And I will see everyone later. Goodbye.